There is a particular kind of silence that exists only in the presence of hunger, not the silence of a quiet room or the silence of a held breath before a scream, but the silence of a body listening to itself empty out, cell by cell, and deciding with the grim pragmatism of a creature that has not yet been granted the dignity of dying, that it will continue. The boy knew this silence well, had been fluent in it since before he could properly speak, had learned its grammar and its syntax and its long, drawn-out vowels, the way other children learn the names of colors or the shapes of clouds, because for him there had been no colors and no clouds, only the rust-stained sky of the lower hives and the slow, structural ache of a stomach that had forgotten what it felt like to be full. His name was Damien, and he was hungry in the way that only children can be hungry. Not the slow, dignified starvation of a man who has made his peace with it, but the sharp, animal, furious hunger of a body that knows it is being cheated, that knows it deserves more, and is not getting more, and is going to scream about it in the only language it has, which is the language of pain. His metabolism burned through calories with the indifference of a furnace burning through paper, and he had the look of something that had been stretched too thin over too many years, his collarbones sharp enough to cast, shadows in the amber light of the lumen strips, his wrists the width of a man's thumb, his ribs visible beneath skin that had been pulled taut by the simple, relentless arithmetic of not enough. And yet he moved through the market like a thing made of wire and stubbornness, weaving between the legs of adults twice his height, dodging the elbows of workers hauling crates of machine parts, slipping beneath the swinging arms of women carrying baskets of synthetic grain, because to stop was to think, and to think was to feel the hunger properly, and to feel the hunger properly was to understand that he had not eaten in 2 days, and that the coppers in his pocket, 3 of them, green with age, would not stretch far enough to fix that. The market was alive today, more alive than usual, which was to say more oppressive, more desperate, more thickly layered with the smell of unwashed bodies and recycled air, and the faintly chemical sweetness of synthetic food being heated over open coils. In the distance, preachers stood upon overturned crates and spoke of the Emperor's divine light, his eternal vigil, his love for his children, their words crashing against one another in the humid air, overlapping, contradicting, becoming a kind of white noise that the crowd had long since ceased to hear. Various women combed through the public while others gave sermons, gaining the attention of other young girls, their voices carrying the particular fervor of people who have decided that faith is the only currency that does not devalue, that prayer is the only transaction that cannot be taxed. And Damien passed them by without a second thought, because faith did not fill a stomach, and prayer did not buy ration bars, and the only thing that mattered right now was the distant, glorious sound of sizzling fat from a vendor's stall 3 rows down. He steered clear of those stalls, the ones carrying fresh bread, the ones with actual meat, real meat, not the pressed and reconstituted kind that tasted of salt and regret, because those were guarded by armed men who stood beside them with their hands resting on shot mauls and last pistols, not because the food was precious in a spiritual sense, but because it was precious in the only sense that mattered in the lower hives, which was that it was scarce, it was expensive, and it was not for him. He passed by people who were deep into their own conversations, 2 Eldar speaking quickly back and forth at each other in sharp, musical syllables that carried the particular venom of people who had been arguing for long time and had run out of new things to say. One of them hissing that she did not care how the other framed it, that she cared more about keeping her family fed than whatever it was that the other was doing, that the human city side was better than the Eldar side, and the other's response was lost in the noise. And Damien did not stop to listen because he could not afford to stop, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant calculating, and calculating meant realizing that 3 coppers was not enough, was never enough, would never be enough, because his body was a thing that consumed and consumed and consumed and gave nothing back, but speed and reflexes and a metabolism that burned like a heresy. One of the Eldar women looked at him as he passed, A pretty woman with shoulder-length cut hair and a scar going from one of her eyes all the way to her chin, and he quickly averted his gaze, feeling a blush begin to form as he pushed forward through the crowd towards the food stalls, because looking at someone meant acknowledging them, and acknowledging them meant the possibility of being acknowledged back, and being acknowledged back meant the possibility of being seen, and being seen meant the possibility of being noticed. And being noticed in the lower hives was how you drew attention to yourself, and drawing attention to yourself was how you disappeared. He turned them over in his palm, feeling their weight, their insufficiency, the way the metal had been worn smooth by 1,000 hands before his, the way the Emperor's profile had been rubbed to a featureless smudge on. 2 of them, and he thought about what they could buy. A half ration at best, a quarter ration if the seller was feeling generous, which they rarely were. Not anymore, not since the shortages had begun, not since the supply lines from the upper hives had thinned to a trickle, and then to nothing, and then to a rumor. He had earned them honestly, mostly, that morning, setting up his little stage in the thoroughfare between the textile merchants and the water recyclers, a stretch of open ground where the foot traffic was thick enough to generate an audience, but not so thick that one was trampled, and he had performed his routine, the tumbling, the juggling with 3 stones he had found in a drainage ditch, the dodging, because the dodging was always the favorite, the thing that made the crowd laugh and throw coppers, the thing that made them feel like they were part of something, like they had power over the small thin boy who was spinning and twisting and contorting his too thin body around the projectiles they hurled at him. He would call out to the crowd, challenge them, go on, throw something, I'll catch it, I'll dodge it, I bet you can't hit me. And they would laugh and hurl pebbles and scraps of metal and the occasional boot, and he would twist and spin and dodge with a grace that had nothing to do with training and everything to do with a half. Primarchs' reflexes burning through a body that had no business being that fast on so little fuel, and for those few minutes he was not hungry, was not thin, was not the boy whose mother was dead and whose father was a name whispered in fear on posters stapled to the walls of the lower hives, but simply a boy who could make stones dance. And the dancing was the only time the silence went away, the only time the furnace in his belly quieted enough for him to hear his own thoughts without the screaming underneath. They had thrown coppers, a few, not many, because the crowd was thinner than yesterday, and the day before that, and the day before that. Fewer people meaning fewer coppers meaning fewer bars meaning more silence. And the arithmetic of survival ground on with the slow, relentless patience of a thing that has all the time in the world and no interest in mercy. And then the performance ended, and the coppers were counted, and the hunger returned like a tide that had merely been waiting for him to look away, and he walked through the market with 3 coppers in his pocket and the particular sharp awareness of a creature navigating a space that has become hostile, keeping his head down, keeping his hands close to his body, keeping his eyes moving, scanning, cataloging the positions of the guards and the flow of the crowd and the particular quality of the silence in the spaces between the stalls. The vendor knew him, a dusty old veteran with one good eye and a mechanical hand that clicked and whirred when he flexed it, who kept a stall of assorted goods, ration bars, water tabs, the occasional tin of something. That might have once been protein, and the bars were wrapped in silver plastic and stamped with the aquila of the Departamento Munitorum, gray and dense and carrying the faintly chemical smell of something that had been processed and reprocessed and stripped of everything that might have once made it recognizable as food. Damien did not know what was in them, and he was not sure he wanted to know. And he most certainly did not know how the grizzled veteran managed to get the tasteless rations, but they were cheap, and they were calories, and they kept the silence at bay. And that was enough. Had to be enough. Was the only thing that could be enough in a world where enough was a luxury that belonged to the upper hives and the armed guards and the people who could afford fresh bread. "Hey, mister," he called up to the vendor, holding his 3 coppers aloft with the particular earnestness of a child presenting an offering at a shrine. and the vendor looked down at him with something in his one good eye. That might have been pity, or might have been the particular weariness of a man who had seen too many children with too few coppers, and he reached beneath his stall and began pulling out the bars, stacking them on the counter with the mechanical precision of his artificial fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and Damien's eyes went wide, because 5 bars was almost a week if he rationed carefully, if his stomach would let him ration carefully, which it rarely did, because his body burned through food, like a star burning through hydrogen, relentless and indifferent and cruel in its need. Then a man pulled up with some crates and whispered something into the seller's ear, and the vendor's expression changed, his jaw tightening, his one good eye hardening with the particular resignation of a man who has been given bad news and must now deliver it to someone who cannot afford to hear it. And he looked down at the boy and said in a grim voice that the price had gone up, I'm afraid. And Damien looked up at him with wide eyes and said, "What?" in a voice full of fear and disappointment, the voice of a child who has just been told that the ground beneath his feet has shifted and no one warned him. And the vendor sighed, the sigh of a man who did not want to do what he was about to do, and said, 5, the price went up, supplies thin, you know how it is. Damien did not know how it was, knew only that 5 bars at the old price had been barely enough, and 5 bars at the new price meant he would need to give some back, and he did the arithmetic in his head with the desperate speed of a creature calculating survival and asked, "Well, how much can I get for the money I gave you?" And the man sighed before his eyes hardened, and he answered, 5. And Damien said, 5. That won't last. Me, 5 days with rationing, silently adding that these would only last him a day or two, hating how much food he needed to eat just to survive, hating the furnace, hating the metabolism, hating the thing in his blood that demanded more and more and more and never said enough. And the vendor looked at him with the stern patience of a man who has made his decision and will not be moved, and a man wielding a stun stick stepped around the stall, looking at Damien, and the vendor said, "Then maybe not eating so many at a time. Learn to ration, kid." Damien proceeded to very reluctantly give back 2 of the bars, his hands shaking as he placed them on the counter, not looking at them because if he looked at them he would cry, and he had promised his mother he would not cry over food. She had been blind, had found him by sound, by touch, by the particular frequency of his breathing, had known when he was crying, had always known, and she had been dead for 2 years now. And the dead do not need you to keep your promises, but he kept them anyway because the keeping was the only thing he had left of her. He turned and quickly walked away with his meager rations, clutching 3 silver-wrapped rectangles against his chest beneath his rags, feeling their weight, their insufficiency. And he thought, if only the seller knew how hard it actually was to ration for himself. If only anyone knew what it was like to have a body that ate everything you gave it and asked for more, that burned through 2,000 calories in a day and demanded twice that again, that made you feel like a pig, like a monster, like a thing that was wrong in some fundamental way that no amount of discipline could fix. He knew he should not have given away those coppers earlier, the ones he had dropped into the cup of the old man with the milky eyes, the ones that meant half a bar, that meant another half day of holding the silence at bay. But the giving had been instinctive, had been the thing his mother would have done, the thing she had taught him to do, press the last of what you have into the hands of someone who has less, because the having less is a thing that eats you from the inside, and the sharing is the only thing that keeps the eating from becoming a consumption, and the consumption is the thing that turns people into ghosts before they are dead. He walked quickly through the market, past the dessert stalls, past the fresh bread, past the fruit that was actual fruit, not the synthetic paste that came in tubes, and the armed guards beside those stalls did not look at him, did not need to look at him, because they knew that a boy like him, thin as a wire, clutching 3 ration bars beneath his rags, was not a customer, was not even a possibility, was simply part of the background, part of the texture of the lower hives, part of the silence. And then he passed the entrance to the undermarket, the stairs descending into amber darkness, the sound of it different from above, quieter, more dangerous, the sound of transactions that did not want to be witnessed. And he felt it pulling at him the way it always did, the knowledge that down there the bars were cheaper and the questions fewer and the looking away more generous. But he did not go down, not today, not until the 3. Bars were gone and the coppers were dry and the silence was so loud that he could hear nothing else. Home was an alley with one entrance, a dead end his mother had called it, but she had meant it as a kindness. Because one entrance meant one direction to watch. One entrance meant that nothing could come at you from behind. And she had built a little hole behind the moisture collector with her hands, blind and patient, feeling the stones and the metal and the gaps until she found a space that was just large enough for 2. And now it was large enough for 1. He sat cross-legged on the rags that served as his bed and unwrapped the first bar with the care of a man opening a letter from someone he loved, the silver plastic peeling back to reveal the gray substance beneath. Dense, compact, faintly chemical-smelling, not looking like food, not smelling like food, tasting like the idea of food that had been described to someone who had never eaten and who had tried very hard to imagine what it might be like. He bit into it, chewed slowly, not because it was good, but because slow meant it lasted longer. Slow meant the silence stayed away for a few more minutes, and somewhere in a room that existed outside of time and reason. A group of beings who were in the strictest technical sense. Gods watched this small creature eat a bar of recycled human remains in an alley that smelled of rust and recycled water, and something in the collective chest of the Emperor's sons tightened in a way that none of them were prepared to name. The apothecary among them spoke first, his voice carrying the particular clinical detachment of a man describing a wound he wished he could treat, explaining that a growing boy needs a great many calories simply to sustain himself, and when that boy carries Primarch blood, the requirement multiplies, that his body is consuming itself to fuel a metabolism it cannot support, that he is not malnourished in the way a normal child might be, but starving in a way that no amount of ordinary food can fix, because Space Marine and Primarch bodies burn through so many calories that they need the extra nutrients to not start tearing their own bodies up. And when fully grown, they can easily go weeks without a scrap of food, but a half. Primarch, who is still very much growing, has a base requirement that is vastly, terrifyingly higher. No one argued, no one could, because the arithmetic was the arithmetic, and the body was the body, and the boy was eating 3 bars when he needed 30, and another among them, vast and gentle, built like a mountain, that had learned to be kind, spoke quietly, saying, "Poor little boy. I would feed him as much as he would want to, whatever he needed, whatever his body demanded." And the words were simple, and the wanting behind them was vast. The wanting of a man who forges weapons and understands that the truest measure of a forge is not the sharpness of the sword it produces, but the warmth of the hearth it provides for those who gather around it. And beside him, in a throne that seemed to swallow the light around it, Konrad Curze said nothing, sat in the particular stillness of a man who has been asked a question he does not wish to answer, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere in the middle distance, not looking at the screen, not looking at his brothers, looking at nothing, which was its own kind of looking, the kind that meant a man was looking very hard at something inside himself and hoping no one would notice. And he was not worried, was absolutely, categorically, in no way whatsoever worried, was merely irritated because the boy talked too much. That was all. He finished the bar, licked his fingers, wrapped the remaining 2 with the tenderness of a man putting away his last savings, his last hope, his last proof that tomorrow would come and that he would still be in it. He lay back, pulled his knees to his chest, made himself small because small meant warm, and warm meant less energy spent on shivering, and less energy spent on shivering meant the bars lasted longer. Above him, through a gap in the corroded metal of the moisture collector, he could see a sliver of sky, the color of rust, always the color of rust, and his mother had told him once that it used to be blue, had been told by her mother, who had been told by hers, a chain of blind women passing down a color none of them had ever seen, and he tried to imagine it and could not, because the sky was rust, and the world was rust, and the bars were gray, and the coppers were green, and the blood when you cut yourself was red, and those were the colors, and there were no others, and that was fine, that was enough, that was the world. He closed his eyes, still hungry, always still hungry, and in the room outside of time the gods watched the boy sleep and no one spoke, because there was nothing to say that would not make the saying of it worse. And Konrad Curze gripped the arms of his throne until the metal groaned, and he was not worried, was merely irritated, and the silence stretched, and then because the universe is what it is, and because silence in the presence of gods is merely the intake of breath before the next wound, the screen flickered, changed, began again to glow, because there was more to see, and there was always more to see. The next day, Damien decided to take the advice of one of the older children from yesterday, a boy who had told him that standing still and juggling was all well and good, but that the crowd wanted a show, wanted something that made them feel like they were part of it, wanted to see a body moving through the air in ways that bodies were not supposed to move. So he employed more acrobatic stunts and tricks for his stage, found enough rocks the night before for the crowd to throw at him, and spent the morning in the thoroughfare between the textile merchants and the water. Recyclers getting the entire audience to hurl stones and pebbles and scraps of metal at him so he could dodge them, amazing them with his reflexes and skills, twisting and spinning and contorting his too-thin frame. Around the projectiles with the particular fluid grace of a creature whose body had been built for exactly this purpose, even if no one who built it had ever intended it to be used for earning coppers in a market that smelled of recycled air and synthetic grain. He got a few coppers that day, which was good considering that his usual crowd was not as thick as it had been before, not because the market was empty, but because the spaces where people used to stand had simply emptied, had become gaps in the murmur of the crowd, absences that no one spoke about, because speaking about them meant asking questions, and asking questions meant drawing attention, and drawing attention in the lower hives was how you disappeared. All because those rogue guys had come and taken some of his customers away, taken the singing girl and the wire-trick boy and the little ones with the cups, taken them with their soft hands and their quiet purpose and their unhurried patience, and no one had stopped them. No one had asked where they were going, because in the lower hives the asking was not done, the questions were not asked. The looking away was the survival, and the survival was the looking away. He counted his earnings with the particular careful attention of a creature calculating whether the numbers would stretch far enough to keep the silence at bay for another day. And as he was dropping the coppers into his palm, he felt the familiar hollow ache of his stomach reminding him that the arithmetic of survival was never finished, was never balanced, was never going to produce a number large enough to satisfy the furnace in his blood. And he thought about how, with what he knew of money and how much he was making, he would barely have enough for just one bar, and the thought was a small, cold thing that settled in his chest and refused to leave. As he was counting, his enhanced hearing picked up on the nearly silent movements of someone much bigger than him coming towards his stage, and he went still, listening and waiting for whoever was trying to come at him, his body coiling with the particular readiness of a prey animal that has learned to register the approach of larger creatures long before they become visible. And he craned his head, listening, and soon he saw that some robed figure was coming into his back alley, same robes as those from yesterday, the same dried blood color, the same hooded silence, the same soft bare hands that gathered up children, the way one gathers up stray objects from a table. And the seeing was the thing that made his blood go cold, that made his hands close around his coppers with a grip so tight the edges bit into his skin. He clutched his money close to him and bolted, using his superior speed against them, weaving through the market crowd with the desperate, thoughtless fluidity of a creature that has been running from things larger than itself for as long as it can remember. And they were running after him, their shouting voices getting softer and softer as he got away from them again. And what was up with these robed guys, he thought? Couldn't they see that he didn't want them to come after him? Couldn't they see that he was just a boy trying to earn enough coppers to buy one ration bar? Couldn't they see that he was not the thing they were looking for? That he was too thin, too fast, too stubborn to be gathered up like the others? Eventually he ran so far, so fast, weaving through building alleys and markets and between some waste collectors, that he was able to get to his home alley, an alley that had only one entrance and was a dead end. His mother's little hole hidden behind the moisture collector, and he pressed himself into it and breathed and waited and did not come out until the sounds of pursuit had faded entirely into the general noise of the market. The following morning he went back to the market because the market was where the coppers were, and the coppers were where the bars were, and the bars were where the silence stayed away. And he passed through the crowd, with the particular careful awareness of a creature navigating a space that has become hostile, keeping his head down, keeping his eyes moving, keeping his hands close to his body where the 3 coppers sat in the pocket of his rags like small, cold promises of another day's survival. The market was alive as it ever was, which was to say loud and desperate and thick with the smell of bodies and the chemical sweetness of synthetic food, and in the distance he could hear various preachers talking about the emperor and all that usual nonsense, their voices carrying the particular fervor of people who have decided that faith is the only currency that does not devalue. And the noise of the area was nearly deafening to most. The sounds of the merchant stalls and people going back and forth in their daily business, and workers passing by, and people selling their wares, the noise constant around him, pressing against his eardrums, with the particular weight of a space that has too many people in it, and not enough of anything else. He could also see various women, some girls really, combing through the public while others gave sermons, gaining the attention of other young girls, their voices threading through the crowd like silver wires. And he passed them by without a second thought, because the sermons were not for him, were not about him, were about a version of the emperor's love that did not include boys who ate carrot peels from bins and slept behind moisture collectors and ran from robed men in dried blood robes. One of the women looked at him as he passed, pretty in the way that lower hive women were pretty, which was to say, despite everything, despite the hunger and the grime and the particular quality of a face that has been worn thin by too many years of not enough, and she had shoulder-length cut hair with a scar going from one of her eyes all the way to her chin, and he quickly averted his gaze, feeling a blush begin to form as he pushed forward through the crowd towards the food stalls, because looking at someone meant the possibility of being seen, and being seen meant the possibility of being known, and being known was a luxury he could not afford. He passed by people who were deep into their own conversations, and 2 Eldar were quickly speaking back and forth at each other, almost angrily, their sharp musical syllables carrying the particular venom of people who had been arguing for a long time and had run out of new things to say but could not stop saying them. And one of them hissed that she did not care how the other framed it, that she cared more about keeping her family fed than whatever it was that the other was doing, that the human city side was better than the Eldar side, and the other's response was lost in the noise, and Damien passed them by without giving them much more thought. Because their argument was not his argument, their politics were not his politics. Their question of which side of the city provided more was a question for people who had sides, who had systems to choose between, who had the luxury of preference, and Damien had none of those things, had only his 3 coppers and his hunger and a particular sharp awareness of where the next meal was coming from. And then he saw the old man, sitting against the wall of a closed stall, legs stretched out in front of him, A cup beside him, his eyes milky and his hands shaking in his body. The body of a person who had been hungry for longer than Damien had been. Alive, who had passed through the stage of sharp animal hunger and arrived at the other side of it. The side where the body simply stops asking and starts accepting, where the silence is no longer a thing to be fought, but a thing to be endured, and Damien stopped walking because the seeing of it was a physical thing. A blow to the chest, a recognition so immediate and so total that it bypassed thought entirely and went straight to the hands, to the pocket, to the 3 coppers that sat there like small, cold promises of another day's survival. He knew he should not give them away. He knew the arithmetic, knew that 3 coppers meant 1 bar, knew that 1 bar meant another day of holding the silence at bay, knew that giving away even 1 copper meant the silence came a little closer, came a little louder, came a little more inevitable. But his mother had taught him the thing about the giving, had pressed it into him, the way she had pressed everything else into him, with her blind hands and her patient voice and the particular stubbornness of a woman who believed that the sharing was the only thing that kept the hunger from becoming a consumption, that the giving was the only thing that kept you human when the world was doing its very best to turn you into a ghosted. He quickly reached into his tattered clothes and gave the man a few coppers, pushing onward even as the old man cried after him for the emperor to bless his kind soul, and the blessing was warm and useless and meant nothing in the practical arithmetic of survival, but it meant everything in the other arithmetic, the one that counted things that could not be eaten. And Damien walked faster because if he slowed down, he would feel the weight of what he had given, and the feeling would make him want to take it back. And the taking back was not something he could do because his mother would not have taken it back, because his mother had given everything. She had, until there was nothing left to give, and she had not taken any of it back. From 3 weeks to 2, he murmured to himself, doing the arithmetic again, recalculating, adjusting, factoring in the coppers he had just given away. And the recalculation produced the same answer it always produced, which was that the numbers did not balance, that they never balanced, that the equation of his existence was always going to come out to not enough. And he walked on through the market with the particular, steady determination of a creature that has learned to keep moving because the moving is the only alternative to the stopping, and the stopping is where the silence lives. He steered clear of the stalls, carrying what little sweet-smelling desserts and fresh loaves of bread there were, making sure to avoid the armed guards standing by those stalls, because he would not be able to survive on those for long. They went bad too quickly, were too expensive as well, were the kind of food that belonged to people who did not have to calculate whether they could afford to eat tomorrow. And instead, he moved towards the stairs that went down, towards the dreary undermarket as it was known, the place beneath the market where the noise from above was able to mask what happened below, where one could find anything if one tried hard enough, where the questions were fewer and the prices were lower and the looking away was more generous. Magnus Civitas had been known for being able to avoid a black market for the Imperium's entire existence, had been the world of Guilliman, the world of order and law and the patient accumulation of civilization, the world where the dark was not supposed to take root, where the desperation was not supposed to curdle into the thing that grew beneath the surface. But desperate times had finally caused one to form up, had finally cracked the foundation that Roboute Guilliman had built with his own hands and his own mind and his own particular genius for logistics, and the cracking was visible now, was tangible, was the thing that Damien could see. When he looked down those stairs, the amber darkness, and the shapes at the bottom, and the particular quality of a space that existed because the world above had failed to provide what the people below needed. He could see the skimpily dressed girls standing in the doorways, some with bruises, others just outright pretty in the way that lower hive girls were pretty, which was to say, despite everything, and his enhanced eyes could see into some darker buildings, and see some probably not much older than himself, huddled in the shadows, waiting for something, and the seeing was the thing that made him look away quickly, violently, as though The image burned, as though the eyes that had seen could be closed and made to forget. And the forgetting was not coming, was not happening, was not a thing his eyes permitted, because his eyes registered everything, and missed nothing and carried the weight of everything they saw into the rest of his day and into the rest of his life. He did not go down. Not today. He walked past the stairs and continued through the market because the 3 bars were still in his rags, and the arithmetic still balanced and the descent was not yet necessary. But the stairs were there, were patient, were waiting with the particular quiet certainty of a thing that knows it will be needed eventually, that knows the coppers will run dry and the bars will run out, and the silence will become so loud that nothing else can be heard. And the waiting was the thing that hummed in the back of his mind as he walked, low and constant and impossible to ignore. In the room outside of time, the apothecary spoke with a particular clinical detachment of a man describing a wound he wishes he could treat, explaining to the family what they were seeing, explaining that Space Marine and Primarch bodies do need more calories for growth, that they burn through so many calories they need the extra nutrients to not start tearing their own bodies up, that when fully grown they can easily go even weeks without a scrap of food. That when they go back to how Damien is half Primarch and still very much growing, they do have a base from how many calories he would need to not only grow, but to sustain himself. That a growing boy would need a lot of calories by himself, but when being half Primarch, he would need a lot more, which also explains why he is so thin. No one argued because the arithmetic was the arithmetic and the body was the body, and the boy was eating 1 bar when he needed 10, and another among them observed that it was standard Imperial Guard doctrine for 1 bar per day, 1 bar supposed to have about 2,000 calories, and the observation hung in the air with the particular weight of a fact that makes everything else seem obscene, because 2,000 calories was what a normal man needed to survive a day of moderate activity, and the boy needed 10 times that, needed 20,000 calories just to keep his body from consuming itself, and he was getting 2,000 on a good day, and nothing on a bad one. And Roboute, watching the boy walk past the stairs and not go down, watching the boy give coppers to an old man with milky eyes, watching the boy run from robed men with soft hands, felt the thing in his chest that he always felt when he saw the failure of his own work made flesh, made visible, made undeniable in the form of a small thin boy clutching 3 coppers in a market that was falling apart around him, and he said, "Considering how bad the food shortages are, no wonder the people are suffering. I wish I could do something." And the words were quiet, were careful, were the words of a man who has built a world and is now watching it crack, and does not know how to fix it without admitting that it was broken in the first place, and the Emperor, lounging in his throne with the particular weariness of a being who has seen too many futures, and been surprised by too few of them, said, "I am sure you are, Roboute, just in the future." And the just in the future was the cruelty, was the knife, was the reminder that the fixing was not here, was not now, was not in this moment, where the boy was walking and the market was failing and the stairs were waiting, and Sanguinius, watching the boy give away coppers he could not afford to give, watching the boy run from the robed men and not cry, watching the boy count his earnings and murmur the arithmetic to himself with the particular steady determination of a creature that has learned to keep moving, said, "Despite coming from Konrad, at least Damien is kind and generous, even when he is starving himself." And the words were gentle, were sad, were the words of a man who sees the good in things and cannot help but name it, cannot help but point it out, cannot help but believe that the naming of it makes it more real, more durable, more likely to survive. The grinding machinery of a universe that does not care about kindness or generosity or the small quiet acts of a boy who gives coppers to old men because his mother taught him to. And Roboute, hearing the word, said, "Kind of like Egidius." And the saying was the connection, was the thread that tied the 2 boys together across the vast and indifferent distance of time and space, the recognition that both of them, The starving boy in the lower hives and the lonely boy in the fortress carried the same essential goodness in their chests, the same stubborn refusal to let the world turn them into something cold. And Lorgar, listening to the exchange with the particular quiet attention of a man who has spent his life searching for the inherent good in things, said, "Perhaps there is an inherent good inside each of the prime children, like how we care for humanity in our own way." And the Emperor, hearing this, said, "Perhaps." And the perhaps was not agreement, was not disagreement, was simply the acknowledgement that the question had been asked and could not be answered yet, that the answer was still forming, still growing, still waiting in the dark for the light to reach it. The afternoon wore on, and the market thinned, and the coppers in Damien's pocket grew lighter, and the bars in his rags grew fewer, and the silence in his stomach grew louder, and he walked the familiar routes of the lower highs with the particular steady awareness of a creature that knows every alley and every shortcut and every place where the robed men have been seen and every place where they have not. And the knowing was the survival, was the map that kept him alive, was the thing that told him where to go and where not to go, and where to run when the running became necessary. And then, as the light was beginning to shift, as the amber glow of the lumen strips was dimming towards the particular quality of evening that meant the market was closing and the crowds were thinning and the guards were changing shifts, he was making his way back to his alley, back to his hole behind the moisture collector, back to the small dark space that was the only thing in the world that was his. And he stopped because his enhanced hearing picked up on something. Picked up on the nearly silent movements of someone much bigger than him, and he went still, listening, and he craned his head, and he saw that some robed figure was coming into his back alley, same robes as those from before, same dried blood color, same hooded silence, same soft bare hands, and the figure was moving slowly, deliberately, with the particular patience of a predator that knows its prey has nowhere to go because the prey's home is a dead end with only one entrance. Damien did not think. Thinking was for later. Thinking was for the safety of a place that was not a dead end. Thinking was for a creature that had options and alternatives and the luxury of choosing between them, and Damien had none of those things. Had only the one entrance in the robed figure coming through it, and the particular animal certainty that if he stayed, he would be taken, would be gathered up like the singing girl and the wire-tricked boy and the little ones with the cups, would be carried away in soft hands to whatever place the robed men carried, the children they gathered. He clutched his money close to him and bolted, using his superior speed against them, weaving through the narrow gap between the moisture collector and the wall, squeezing through a space that was barely large enough for his thin frame, and he was out, was in the market, was running, and the robed figure was behind him, was shouting, was calling for others, and he ran through the alleys and between the stalls and under the legs of the crowd and past the preachers and past the Eldar and past the armed guards and past the stairs that went down into amber darkness, and he ran until the shouting faded, until the pursuit became a memory, until his lungs were burning and his legs were shaking and the 3 coppers in his pocket were the only proof that he still existed, that he was still free, that he had not been gathered up and carried away. Not his alley, not the one with the moisture collector and the hole his mother had built, but another one, another dead end with another entrance, and he pressed himself into the darkest corner and breathed and waited, and did not come out until the market had closed and the lumen strips had dimmed to their lowest setting, and the lower hives had fallen into the particular silence of a place that is too tired to make noise, and in that silence he sat with his 3 coppers and his 2 bars and the memory of the robed figure coming into his alley, and he understood, with the cold certainty of a creature that has been running for its entire life, that the running was not going to stop, that the robed men were not going to stop, that the gathering was going to continue until every child in the lower hives had been taken, or until someone, somewhere, decided to stop them. And the deciding was not his to do, was not his to make, was a thing that belonged to the people in the fortress above, the people with the guns and the armor and the power to say no, and those people were not looking, were not listening, were not aware that in the dark beneath their walls, a boy was sitting in an alley with 3 coppers and 2 bars, and the knowledge that tomorrow the robed men might find him again. And in the room outside of time, the family watched the boy sit in the alley and breathe and wait, and no one spoke for a long time because there was nothing to say that would not make the saying of it worse. And the silence in the room was the silence of beings who have just been shown a thing they cannot fix, cannot change, cannot reach through the screen and alter. And the not fixing was the cruelty, was the wound, was the particular quality of a helplessness that is not merely frustrating, but devastating, that says you can see it, but you cannot stop it. You can witness it, but you cannot prevent it. You can feel it, but you cannot change it. And the feeling without the changing is the thing that breaks you, is the thing that makes you grip the arms of your throne until the metal bends and your jaw tightens and your eyes burn with a fury that has no outlet, no release, no way to become anything other than the silent, grinding pressure of a man watching a child run from monsters and being unable to do anything except watch. The projector hummed. The screen held. The boy sat in the alley. The market was empty. The stairs went down into amber darkness. The robed men were still out there, still walking, still gathering, still taking children from the spaces where no one official looked, and the taking was going to continue, was going to happen again tomorrow and the day after, and the day after that, until someone decided to stop it, until someone climbed 100 meters of stone in the dark with bleeding fingers and said no, and the someone was coming, was already on his way. Was already standing at the base of the wall looking up, but he was not here yet, was not here now, was not here in this moment where the boy sat in the alley with 3 coppers and 2 bars, and the knowledge that the dark was full of hands that wanted to take him, and the silence was the inheritance.